Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. Happy Election Day. Today, Americans will decide all across the nation who they want to lead them over the next 4 years. Will it be Vice President Kamala Harris, who's been serving as Vice President from 2021, or former President Donald Trump, who had served in the White House from 2017 through 2021? Now, before this video gets started, I want us to take a moment to really just reflect on where we are. This election season has felt far more grueling and intense than even 2020, and I've covered every election since 2018 onwards, and it has been such a wild ride. This election, I think, will be the most memorable one for me personally. I think just given everything that has happened, hopefully it will be the most memorable one, and that future ones won't be as intense or arguably even as close and competitive. But where we are today is that today is Election Day. A lot of things actually have changed over the past week since my recent prediction, and I'm really excited to embark on this journey of just diving deep into what the Electoral College looks like on the national level, as well as looking at the Senate elections and governor elections, given that this will be my first set of governor elections and only set of governor predictions for this election cycle. Now, before the video gets started, again, just a slight caveat one more time, I want you to check out a website called ltelections.com. It was created by the Discord team over here at Let's Talk Elections, and they have put together a phenomenally looking website. This is a great website to look at election results. They have every type of election result you can think of for the 2024 cycle, and just taking a quick scroll through, you'll see that many of these results here just honestly look quite great. They really do have a great job at understanding what the election is doing. They have a forecasting model that they'll be implementing throughout the evening, and so I highly recommend that you check it out. If you just want to have it open as a tab while you're watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, whatever you might be, definitely recommend it. And then the final shout out here for the Discord team. Did a really great job on the website, which is to say you should join the Discord server if you have one. If you're at all interested in talking about elections today, tomorrow, the next day, some days after that, whatever it might be, discord.gg/LTE. It'll take you right to the invite link. Highly recommend you check it out. Final thing here is that a lot of you guys have been asking throughout the entire campaign website, what website do I use for election predictions? Now, I've had it in the description box for quite some time, and so if you go down there, you'll see a lot of other FAQs that you can see answers to, but to make things easier for you, yet another political map simulator is the website I use, yapms.com. Super great. You can see things ranging from elections internationally and domestic. You can look at United States elections ranging from 2022 to 2020 to 2024. They have everything here. Everything you could ever want. All classes of Senate seats. Literally everything you could want for an election prediction website. Highly recommend you check it out. I love it because I use it every single day. So, with that being said, shout out through the website, through Discord, through YAPMS. Let's get into it. Let's start off by talking about the 2024 governor elections. Sorry, I probably just messed you up in your train of thought there by jumping over to the presidential map, but let's get some of the easier things out of the way. Some of the, in theory, lower stakes elections, but arguably very high stakes elections for these individual candidates. Now, on your screen right now is an empty 2024 governor election map. Currently, Republicans have the upper hand, having more governorships over Democrats. The current numbers hovering around even though the Republicans do have an advantage. Point being, not much really is going to change in the elections this evening in the governor races because there aren't that many competitive ones in the first place. To save time, I'm going to characterize all of the safe ones for Republicans and Democrats, so we don't need to spend time talking about races that simply are not going to be competitive. And so, starting off the bat, in terms of safe Republican states, they have a lot of them. They have Utah, North Dakota, they have Montana, they have Missouri, they have West Virginia, they have not Indiana, actually, surprisingly. And the final one here is the state of Vermont. Now, you might be shocked. Wait a second. LTE, why is Vermont a safe Republican state? Well, if you know Governor Phil Scott, he is one of the most highly respected and highly approved of governors across the nation. He's a Republican from Vermont, very liberal in comparison to some of the Make America Great Again Republicans, but still at heart a Republican, and he's expected to win this race by upwards of 20 to 30 points. Vermont, as much as it is a Democratic state on the national level, when it comes down to localized elections, is far more in favor of electing Republicans than you might think. So with that brings Republicans to 6. In the final breakdown of the map here, we have about 5 remaining races. Democrats have 2 of them that can be considered safe Democrat. Delaware and Washington, which Republicans aren't even fully contesting to the same extent you see many of these other races. And so that brings the Democrats to 2. Republicans to 6. Now, you might be wondering at face value too. If you don't know much about the governor elections, you're asking, are any of these races flipping thus far? And the answer is no. None of the races we have characterized, starting off in this map, have flipped from red to blue or blue to red. So all of them are staying with their incumbent parties, and now it just boils down to these 3 remaining toss-up seats. Indiana really isn't a toss-up. If I'm being honest with you, this is a state that is very, very much, Republican. We do have instances where individual candidates can really drag down a race. That is the case in Indiana. Not enough that Democrats will win it, but Democrats are running a stellar candidate. They're running, Republicans aren't running the best candidate. A lieutenant governor candidate is really, really bad on the Republican side. And if this was a swing state, Indiana would be closer to being lean or likely blue. But because it is a safe red state, it's only going to narrow it down by just a few percentage points. Even then, though, Republicans maintain the governor's mansion. So then it comes down to New Hampshire and North Carolina, the final two states to characterize. Now, you might be surprised to see that North Carolina is actually going to be likely blue. Some of you guys have believed it to be safe blue, and some people thought it would be more competitive. I'm here to meet you in the middle. My explanation to you is that because of hyperpolarization, there will be many people who will not tell a pollster that they are voting for Mark Robinson. But because he is a Republican, they would prefer him and all of his scandals over a Democrat. This is the case that we have seen all across the nation since Donald Trump has become the president of the United States. And not to say this is the perfect way that you run a country, the perfect way that you vote, but I'm not here to critique individuals. What I'm here to do is set out to what I understand to be the margin and predict that margin on Election Day. And right now, North Carolina, I think we're going to hover around Josh Stein, roughly at a 9 to 10 point victory, even if the polls are suggesting that victory is going to be anywhere from 15 to 20. So, North Carolina, likely Democrats, they hold on to that governor's race, really lucked out with the Republican nominee there. When it comes down to New Hampshire, this is the final state in the governor's map here, we have one race to rule them all. The real race, that is the most competitive one we have seen that you have heard absolutely nothing about. Former Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte is running for election in New Hampshire. She has ran for statewide office before. She knows how to do this thing. She has won before. She is running against Joyce Craig. Now, this race is one that many Democrats have hoped, likely to no avail, that New Hampshire will flip because Chris Sununu, similar to Phil Scott, is a highly respected and approved of governor nationwide in the top 10 most approved of governors, and he's a Republican from a state Biden won by 7. And so New Hampshire, this time, I do think is going to have a slight Republican advantage, and Kelly Ayotte, I do think, given the data we've seen, given the crossover support that she has been able to win over, and even though she has leaned very much more into the Donald Trump endorsement, into the Make America Great Again endorsement, for reference in 2016 as the Republican senator running for re-election, she did not vote for Donald Trump, or at least publicly said she would not be voting for the former president. In 2024, she is gladly touting Donald Trump's endorsement and fully endorsing him in the election cycle. Regardless, though, New Hampshire, similar to that of Vermont, is much more willing to elect Republicans at a localized level, and as a result, Kelly Ayotte wins the governorship in New Hampshire, winning the true most competitive governor's race in this cycle. So where do we end up? Democrats win 3 seats, Republicans win 8. Democrats are probably not too happy if they lose New Hampshire on election night, but they're probably really happy about North Carolina, where they lock in another 4 years of a Democratic governor, where this governor candidate actually might drag down the Republicans to a point where they no longer even have a supermajority in the state legislature. And all in all, that's really good news for the Democratic Party. So, governor's map here, 8 for the Republicans, 3 for the Democrats, absolutely no seats, change or switch party. Overall map, non-changing. Now let's move over to the Senate elections. I'm sure many of you guys have been wondering, what do I think about the Senate elections? Or maybe you haven't and you just don't care. But I'm here to tell you regardless. The Senate races here, there are a lot of them. 34 toss-up seats. Now, Republicans, as I've been saying, since 2022, when we first started exploring the 2024 Senate map, since 2022, Republicans have had the undeniable advantage in these Senate maps. And that's because, for this one in particular, you could not have conceived a more favorable map for Republicans at baseline. Take a look at these numbers from the beginning. 38 to 28. You might be wondering, what does that mean? Well, 28 seats on the Democratic side and 38 seats on the Republican sides are seats that are not up for this election. Only about a third of every Senate class or Senate seats are up, and that's what is determined by class. So about a third of the Senate seats are up every 2 years. That way you can do a 6-year term and do that cycle, right? Barring any special elections, you're hovering around 33 to 34 seats. Republicans have 38 seats that are not up for election, which means in the worst case scenario, I mean, talking about hell freezing over, Democrats could be at 62 seats in the Senate. Republicans, however, if they have it their way, would be at 72 seats. And in terms of the seats that Republicans are defending, they're defending a lot more territory that is much more favorable to them, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Whereas Democrats are doing a lot of defense in Trump counties, a lot of defense in Trump territory, areas that are likely going to vote for the former president or get a lot closer to voting for the former president than 2020 or as close as 2020. And that's where Democrats really run into a problem. When we start off this map here, if we're just to give Democrats this little beginning of a Hail Mary, you would find that you would have California, Washington, right? These states that Democrats are certainly going to win, but these states, watch them closely. Washington, California, Hawaii, Maryland here. Now, we'll talk about Maryland in a moment. I want to give it the energy that it needs because I'm from Maryland and I care a lot about my state, and it's a competitive Senate race for the first time in a very long time. We'll talk about it. New Jersey is safe. New York is safe. Rhode Island is safe. Connecticut is safe. Vermont is safe. And watch that number. We just passed the Republicans here when we're looking at it from the Democratic lens. Vermont here is safe. Maine is safe. This is the number for Democrats. 40 seats in the U.S. Senate that can be considered safe. That's after I've characterized 12 Senate seats. Now, Maryland in particular, you might remember because Angela Alsobrooks, my county executive actually, Prince George's County executive, running for Senate in Maryland against former Governor Larry Hogan. This race was competitive. Hands down, was competitive. As things have gotten worse for Larry Hogan, his approval rating has dipped from being plus 40 statewide to about plus 20. And you might be thinking, okay, plus 20 is enough to win. But no, it's not in a state that Biden won by 30 and a state that Biden and Harris will win by 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, whatever the range is. Maryland is a state that is blue and true. It is blue through and through. There is no way around it. Larry Hogan got lucky, similar to that of Phil Scott in Vermont, Kristen Nunu in New Hampshire. Maryland used to be a state, or was a state, or is a state, that was more willing to elect Republicans at a localized level. This time, not happening. Larry Hogan went from leading by 13 at the beginning of this race against Angela Alsobrooks. 13 points in the Senate race. Fast forward to November, he's down 15 points. The momentum is on the Democratic Party side because Larry Hogan refused to not vote for Donald Trump. He refused to endorse Kamala Harris. On top of that, he refused to identify that he would identify as an independent rather than a Republican, and he wouldn't come out against the national abortion ban as strongly as many voters would have liked. After all, he does personally call himself pro-life in some instances. That does damage in a blue state like Maryland. Moving past it, though, I will say that's going to be safe for the Democrats, but it really doesn't make all that difference because Maryland's a state that Democrats should have relied on. And again, that comes back to this point of Democrats constantly playing defense. You can see it across the nation. Maryland, safe blue, brings Democrats to 40 seats. That's 12 seats, and all it puts Democrats is 2 seats over the Republicans, and we have not even given them a singular state yet. So let's make this harder for Democrats. Let's take a look at exactly why this map is so bad and why it contributes to the Republican Party's chances of winning the Senate majority. Well, Indiana is safe red. Missouri is safe red. And it wasn't always like this. If you go back in 2018, you'll remember that these races were competitive, but no more. Mississippi also competitive, no more. Nebraska's special election safe red. North Dakota safe red was competitive before. Tennessee was competitive before. West Virginia was competitive before. Fascinating, right? In 2012 and 2018, these races were total toss-ups. Now they're safe for the Republican Party. Again, back to that point of hyperpolarization. But again, Republicans already at 45, and we're not done yet. Wyoming is safe red, and Utah is safe red. So here's where we are. 47 seats in the Senate for Republicans and 40 for the Democrats. Now, if Donald Trump wins the election tonight, Republicans would just need 3 seats to win. 3 seats to win the Senate majority. That's it. Democrats would need 11 out of the 13 toss-ups. And take a look at where some of these toss-ups are. Nebraska, where the independent candidate there has already declared he would not caucus with the Democrats, so take that out of the realm of possibility. You would need 11 out of the remaining 12 toss-up races. Now, Democrats do make some ground, and they do win some of these battleground states. But Republicans, at the end of the day, do hold that upper hand because the Senate map has been built in a way that just, by luck of the draw, has benefited the GOP quite heavily. Republicans at 47, Democrats at 40. Let's continue going down this pathway. So, where we are right now, let's take a look at some of the likely states. States that are going to be decided by 5 to 15 points. States that are going to be pretty solid for one political party, but not solid enough to say that we can be safe in terms of the margin. That 15 points more will be the result. So, where do we start off for Democrats, since they're the ones behind? They have quite a few. They have, to start off, Minnesota, which you might disagree with. And I can honestly invite you to engage with me in a meaningful discussion after this election about whether or not this prediction was right or wrong. Because Amy Klobuchar is running for re-election. Now, she had a phenomenal result in 2018, don't get me wrong. But what I've come to understand about this current state of the race, especially in presidential election years, it's very difficult to outrun your national candidate by that much. I think Amy Klobuchar will win by anywhere from 12 to 14 points. I don't think we're in for a 20, 30-point margin like she has seen in the past. I think ultimately Minnesota narrows down because that's the nature of the nationwide vote. Similar to that of New York in 2022, when Chuck Schumer won by 15 points despite winning by 40 in the election prior. It's fascinating, but it's the way things go when polarization kicks in. Looking at this cycle, I think Minnesota is not going to be the exception. And for Virginia, too, I think although Tim Kaine has run a really strong campaign and Hung Hao has run a really poor campaign, it ultimately still is a battleground state. And if Kamala Harris is winning the state by 9 or 10 points, Tim Kaine probably isn't winning any more than 12 to 14 points. He's not going to outrun her by that much, and I think at the end of the day, Virginia is going to be a blue state, but it's not going to be blue by 15 points plus. New Mexico is another state that I think could be a bit of a sleeper here, that no one's really focusing on it, no one's really talking about it. It reminds me a lot of 2020, when it ended up being a 6-point race, despite it being a race that was expected to be 15 points plus. I think something similar could happen where it's narrower than expected, probably would still be double digits here, but again, keep in mind that the races that we're working with and what we're analyzing, like New Mexico, don't get a lot of polls. They don't get a lot of attention, and as a result, you're basing your information and understanding and analysis of the race off of limited historical context. So New Mexico very well could end up being a safe Democratic state. As of right now, what I'm most comfortable doing is characterizing it as likely Dem, and I do think that's where the margin will reside between 5 to 15 points. And the final state I'm going to characterize as likely Dem is the state of Arizona. Now, you might be shocked to see this because Arizona is a toss-up state, but because Republicans have ran such a poor candidate and really haven't rebounded in the way we've even seen Sam Brown in Nevada, which is a state that has been very tricky for Republicans in this Senate race in particular. Jackie Rosen defeated her Republican incumbent in 2018 when she was a member of the House, went on to this cycle to lead by double digits in the polls. Only now is it starting to tighten. Arizona, though, I do think Ruben Gallego's on track as he has ran a pretty strong campaign. We're out 5 to 6 points, completely outrunning Kamala Harris on the national level. So, Arizona, New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, Democratic states. So now we're at 47 to 44, which means the remaining states are going to either be likely for the Republicans, lean for the Republicans, lean for the Democrats, or tilt on either side. Here's the newsflash. Republicans, I do believe, will maintain Senate control, and we can map exactly how this happens. It starts off with a pretty good result when it comes down to the likely margins. Florida and Nebraska, although we've seen really good movement there for Dan Osborne in Nebraska, I still think it's going to be about a 6 to 7 point race. Still good for independent candidates and Democrats overall. Not the best news that they were hoping for. They were hoping to unseat Deb Fischer. I don't think that's going to happen. When it comes down to Florida, though, Rick Scott's on track for a pretty substantive victory. What started out as being potentially more competitive than the presidential level, I still think that is the case. I still think we're going to see Rick Scott win by about 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 points. It's going to be a wide range. A lot of the early voting numbers, too, were very favorable to the GOP. I don't like to read too deep into the early voting numbers, but it's a really steep hill for Democrats to climb, and they aren't climbing it today based on the early voting numbers that I've seen. And so Florida, Nebraska thus far, Republicans at 49. There's another likely Republican state. And no, it's not Texas, and no, it's not Ohio. It comes out of the state of Montana. Now, Jon Tester has made some recent ground, built it back up against Tim Sheehy, but it just becomes such a problem. Because Montana is a state that when running alongside Donald Trump, votes for Republicans pretty heavily. 2020 being a perfect example when the incumbent Democratic governor, Steve Bullock, ran for Senate in Montana and tried to make a whole thing and build up all this coalition amongst Republicans. While he did end up performing better than Biden, he only outran Biden by about 6 points. I don't think Jon Tester is going to outrun Kamala Harris by 16 points. I think polarization has taken a hold. We're starting to see it in the polls. Tim Sheehy is starting to lead. And I think at the end of the day, Jon Tester, who was a stellar candidate in 6, 12, and 18, will not survive this cycle, and Montana will go to the GOP, putting them at 50 seats in the Senate. So now I'm sure you can tell from the fact that I believe Republicans will maintain Senate control, or win Senate control from Democrats, rather, not maintain it, that they will win one of the remaining 6 toss-up seats, and I think that's going to be the case. It's a difficult position for Democrats. They have been really, really in a very, very precarious situation because the map here just doesn't work in their favor. I think Democrats hold the upper hand in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, where they should be very fortunate that the incumbent Democrats, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, Bob Casey Jr. in Pennsylvania, decided to run for re-election, because had they not, these very well could be lean Republican states. Michigan, Elisa Slotkin was a star recruit, very strong for the Democratic Party. I think they made a really good choice in selecting her to run for Senate. Republicans, though, didn't exactly crash out. While Eric Hovde and Dave McCormick and Mike Rogers are no cream of the crop, they're fine Republicans who can hold their own and aren't pushing away voters the same way we see people like Kari Lake doing actively in Arizona. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are going to be competitive, though. They're going to be really close. They're going to come down to the wire, and we are going to see that Kamala Harris's margin will likely determine what their margin is. I think all 3 of these candidates will outrun Kamala Harris, but narrowly. And if she loses the states by a massive amount, they're losing too. But that's why I think it's going to be a bit more favorable for Democrats on the presidential level, at least in these 3 states in particular, and that Democrats in the Senate race will also win too. I also believe that Nevada is going to be a lean Democratic state. I don't think that there are many people who disagree with that either. I think Jackie Rosen has ran a phenomenal campaign in comparison to what Republicans ran, and Sam Brown also, too, just has a really strong history of being more extreme. You can find that his policies in 22 are not the policies of 24, but they're coming back to haunt him because, after all, it was just 2 years ago where he was trying to court that Make America Great Again vote. Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all states that I think Democrats are on track to win. The final 2 states here, Ohio and Texas, are quite tricky. On one end, I do believe that Texas is going to be a state that Ted Cruz ends up holding on to. I think he'll win by 1 to 2 points. It'll be closer than 2018, at least from what I expect, if Colin Allred is outrunning Kamala Harris by the margin that he's expected to. But it won't be a Colin Allred victory. It's going to take a lot for Democrats to win Texas in the future. It's a lot of money, a lot of time, and right now the infrastructure just simply doesn't exist. After all, National Democrats didn't even invest in the Texas race until weeks before the election. Colin Allred was raising the alarm bell. Democrats spent $50 million in Montana, $3 million in Texas. And so if Texas ends up being about 5 points closer than Montana, there's going to be a lot of reflection on the party about, even if you do have an incumbent, maybe it doesn't make sense to spend, $50 million to a Senate race that isn't going to go your way when the early data even suggests that your candidate isn't performing to top tier. Now, I get it. Montana was a bit tricky in terms of a situation. Texas, too. Also, the infrastructure isn't there. It's a lot more expensive than Montana. But that's a reason to have more money in Texas than Montana because based on where you are in terms of population, Montana actually probably would be, I think John Tester would have done just as well, having spent $3 million as well as $50 million. So that's my 2 cents on that race. Texas, though, right now, I think that Ted Cruz does pull out ahead. Colin Allred, unfortunately, loses the Senate race, but narrower than Beto O'Rourke. Really good results for Democrats for the future, but not the ones they were hoping for on Election Day. The final map here, the final state that I want to characterize, is the battleground state of Ohio, where I think I'm seeing mixed signals. Today, this morning, we've seen a lot of excitement and enthusiasm in urban areas in Ohio. That's good for Sherrod Brown. The problem is, I think Donald Trump wins by roughly the exact same margin as he did in 2020 and 2016 in this state. With no investments from the Democratic Party outside of the Senate race, and Donald Trump seeing minimal slipping in the polling data, his worst poll showing him up by 3 points, 5 points, that's good for Donald Trump, right? Because it means that he's going to win the state, and if they are just even slightly underestimating him, it carries many other Republicans across the finish line, including Bernie Moreno, where I don't think we're going to see Sherrod Brown outrun Kamala Harris by 6 to 8 points. It'll be somewhere closer to 3 to 4 points. I just don't think Kamala Harris is going to narrow down the state that much to a point where Sherrod Brown is able to win the Senate race. And so with that being said, for the first time in a very long time, Ohio is red on my map. Republicans at 52, Democrats at 48. So Republicans win back the Senate majority. They hold on to all their governorships in the governor races. Republicans are at a good point. Starting off baseline, this is a good starting point for as we enter into the presidential map. But we aren't done yet. The presidential map is arguably the most important map of this all, the biggest one, the one that we need to spend the most time talking about, but it's going to be a really close race regardless. So it's going to be something that is definitely worth discussing and talking about. But the Senate races right now I think are pretty settled, 52 to 48. Republicans decisively win back Senate control. So, sigh, catch your breath. We're back to a blank map. 538 electoral votes that are going to be the most important part of this election. Throw out the governor elections, throw out the House elections, throw out the Senate elections. Obviously, massive implications on that front, but what the focus is for the next segment of this video, the presidential election. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have done a really good job at this campaign. I want to start off by saying that I do think in terms of who has run a better campaign, although the results may show something different on Election Day, Kamala Harris, given that she has had less than 110 days to turn nothing into something, and Tim Walz, who joined the ticket in August, the Democratic ticket has rebounded from a point where they were destined for the worst Democratic defeat of the 21st century to potentially a really strong showing of the 21st century. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, on the other hand, I think for a while ran a really good campaign leading up until the RNC. I think arguably leading up until Kamala Harris entered into the race. I think at that point in time, we were seeing Donald Trump actually start to shift his messaging, but also just perform better amongst the American electorate. Now, a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that President Joe Biden was not polling well amongst the public. It wasn't just Donald Trump doing well, it was Joe Biden not doing well. But it has to be said that over the past 3 months, I have been less than impressed by the campaign that Donald Trump has ran, and it's for a variety of different reasons, which I'll tell you right now. One, in terms of message control, Donald Trump although he started his career, and political career rather, with all of these outlandish claims and all of these more extreme takes that a lot of Americans actually did very much agree with and do very much agree with. Don't get lost on that. Donald Trump is not his own candidate. He is propelled and propped up by around half the country. That matters in an election where you need to win more than half the country. So it's all about winning on those margins. Donald Trump started off by being this candidate that right before an election got in line. In 2016, you can watch it in the rallies. The rhetoric is entirely different than just weeks prior. Why? Because his campaign consultants and his managers and the people who surrounded himself by said, you need to focus on yourself and draw a juxtaposition between you and Hillary Clinton in a way that isn't she's smart and you look ignorant. It needs to be that Donald Trump speaks from a point of challenging the status quo. And in 2016, he did that right. The momentum was on his side. The James Comey letter had just dropped. Everything was moving in favor of the former president. And although he did, in quote unquote, barely win the election, he still won the election. In 2020, things got a bit different. Donald Trump tried a new style of campaign. He campaigned on COVID. He campaigned on misinformation surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. He very much was building up his candidacy off of even more of a personality than 2016. It didn't work. In 2024, I think what we have seen from Donald Trump is that he's not playing by the book that won in 2016. And he's not even playing by the book that got him close to winning in 2020. The picks like J.D. Vance and making decisions about how you're holding your rallies, who you're inviting to your rallies, not condemning hate speech at your rallies, does damage to his candidacy. Because there are also a new wave of young voters that grew up in the day and age where they were in middle and high school. I'm one of those people where I was in middle school when Donald Trump was elected president. I am now voting for the first time in my first presidential election. I voted in the midterms, but this is my first presidential election. And I think for a while, a lot of people understood that in 2016, what was brought up then didn't seem to matter as much to the electorate. A lot of these things matter now. And when Donald Trump makes the more outlandish claims and puts himself back in the spotlight in a very negative way, although he has this idea that all press is good press, at some point you get to a point of no return. For a lot of voters, that was January 6th, where there was nothing Donald Trump could ever do to win their vote over. Granted, 95% of them were already going to vote for the Democrats in the future elections regardless. But it's about that 5%. And should Donald Trump lose the election by 2,000 votes in a swing state, 5,000 votes across 3 swing states, there are going to be a lot of questions about, well, should that Madison Square Garden rally have actually happened? Should we have listened to the former president in allowing him to maintain a presence on Twitter and Truth Social? These would be questions that will be unpacked and unearthed. I think Kamala Harris, too, given that she was given a campaign that was seemingly going to lose, easily going to lose, and turning it into something where you are now going to either be the favorite or close to being the favorite, makes a huge difference. Makes a huge difference and really shows that Kamala Harris has done something that many Democrats could not have. And that was come very close to winning an election and potentially even win a presidential election. And so, as we go through the map here and as we get through this electoral college victory for either side of the aisle, I just want that point to be made because I do think it makes a difference as to how candidates run their races, as to how candidates win and lose elections, because it makes a difference in future ones, just as it is making a difference in this cycle. But to not waste any time, let's start by characterizing all of the safe Republican states and then move into the safe Democratic states. Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, North and South Dakota. These are all states that are safe for the Republican Party. Nebraska at large, Nebraska's 3rd district, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, Missouri. We'll see here. Definitely going to be interesting, or not Missouri, Indiana, Missouri. I'm going to go ahead and hold on this front. Republicans are at roughly 81 electoral votes that we consider to be safe at this exact moment. Now, you might be shocked to see that, but I want us to also remember, and I should have mentioned this earlier on, I am now thinking from the point and lens of all this new Midwestern data that shows that there has been some minimal bleeding from the Trump side. Keep in mind, I do my ratings based on margins. They are not based on percent chance at victory. They are based on margins. So, if Kamala Harris wins a state like New York by 14.9, it's a likely state, no matter how much Democrats knew they were going to win by, or how much we know Democrats are going to win by, or the chance at victory. That's why we don't have Indiana, or Missouri, or Kansas, or Montana as safe Democratic states. Because these states were all on the verge of being likely red in 2020, and I think because we have seen some movement in Midwestern areas, movement because of abortion bans, I do think, especially too, that Kamala Harris has grown that support amongst white college-educated voters. It will be enough to nudge some of these states into being likely red states. So fear not if you're a Republican looking at the 81 number, freaking out, like, where do you go from here? No, right? Where do we go from here? There are a lot of states to go from here if you're looking for a pathway to 270. So keep that in mind. Republicans, though, 81 safe states, 81 safe electoral votes. Let's move over to the Democratic side. Now, they have a good amount of safe states, too. They have Washington, Oregon, California, which pretty much completely gets rid of that Republican lead or advantage. Hawaii there, Illinois there, Maryland, shout out Maryland again, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. And this is where Vermont comes in, District of Columbia, Maine's 1st District. These are all safe for the Democratic Party. So where does it put them? Well, roughly 100 electoral votes more than Republicans. But to not also harp too much on the likely states, we can characterize those now because they're states that we know are just going to be slightly under that 15-point margin, but Republicans are going to win regardless. This includes states like Kansas, Montana, Missouri, Indiana, South Carolina, Alaska, Nebraska's 1st district. Take a look at 2020 result if you want to know what I mean about that, but it's going to be likely for the Republican Party, Nebraska's 1st, and Ohio, and Florida. Now, this is where you start to see the map build out, and Maine 2nd. Sorry, I don't know why I'm forgetting on that front. But this is where you start to see the map build out to a much more competitive lens. Democrats at 181, Republicans at 173. They win Ohio and Florida, 2 states that Democrats, in theory, would love to win, have won in the past, will not win this cycle no matter how hard they try. These states are going to be solid for the GOP. Republicans are going to win these states. It's going to be okay. Alaska, I do think we might see a surprise out of that state. It's going to narrow up. Maine's 2nd district is going to be, I think, roughly on par with what it was in 2020. But overall here, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance at 173 electoral votes. Now, Democrats have their own end of likely states. Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine at large, Minnesota, and Nebraska's 2nd district are all what we consider to be likely Democratic states. So these are the states that Democrats can pretty much rely on to carry them closer to the 270 electoral vote number. But it isn't necessarily a state that is solid enough to be solid, right? These states could still, in theory, flip to the GOP. They could arguably be a lot closer than what a state like California might be, which would narrow down from 27 to 25 if it's a bad situation for Democrats. And so Minnesota, Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, and New Hampshire and Maine at large, and Nebraska 2nd, all districts and states the Democrats can rely on for this cycle. So now we get to the final states here. The final battleground states. Now, I'm going to get things out of the way in saying that Iowa is a state that I think because of that Ann Seltzer poll, I know I sound crazy, I do think it's going to be about Trump plus 4. I think given that we've seen a lot of surge in women registration across the state, combined with the fact, or enthusiasm rather, but combined with the fact that the abortion ban that's in the state might actually localize a big reason why Kamala Harris is doing better in this state in comparison to some other battlegrounds, is that Iowa has a very restrictive 6-week abortion ban that many voters disagree with. And because so many Republicans in Congress on the presidential level, or at least those advising on the presidential level and across the state have come out in support of this 6-week abortion ban, it arguably is seen as far too extreme by even some Republicans, and it's doing damage to the party's perception and how voters perceive candidates that align with it. And so Iowa right now is a lean Republican state, putting Republicans at 179. The next state I would consider to be a lean Republican state is going to be the state of Texas, which I've wavered back and forth between making it likely and making it lean. I don't think Allred will be outrunning Kamala Harris by a massive amount to a point where they would share different characterizations. I think Texas is at a point where it's going to be lean Republican. Trump will probably win the state by 4 points, 4.5%. Improvement for Democrats, but not enough. Not enough yet to get them to the presidential victory in Texas. But that does boost Donald Trump with its 40 electoral votes to 219, to Kamala Harris's Tim Walz's 226. So now it comes down to the final remaining 7 toss-up states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. Democrats are in a really tricky position because they have many pathways to 270, but it arguably means that Republicans do too. So to kick things off, we only have one state that I feel comfortable as of today characterizing as lean for either side of the aisle, and that is for the Democrats in the state of Michigan, which I would consider to be a lean Democratic state. So now we're down to tilt states. States that are decided by less than 1%. Kamala Harris wins the state by 0.0001, that's tilt. Wins it by 0.9, that's tilt. All it matters is that it's under a point and that it goes to a candidate. I don't like to leave toss-ups. I don't like to leave uncertainty in my election predictions because I think it's wrong. I think it misleads people who are looking to see a conclusive, definitive answer as to what I think we will see in the election. Now, I'm going to start messing around with the map here so you can get a better indication of what I think. Based on some of the numbers we're seeing out of Arizona, I do think that Donald Trump wins the state of Arizona by a very narrow amount. I think it's going to shift minimally from 2020. Democrats are really going to try to turn out their base there, though Republicans are going to do it too, and they're doing it well. Arizona is the state that's going to go to Donald Trump. That's the first flip of the evening from blue to red. Still, it's going to be interesting to watch. It might not. It may go. I don't know. As of right now, though, I do give Donald Trump the upper hand in the state of Arizona. So this puts him at 230 electoral votes. And I think we've seen some bleeding amongst Latino voters who care heavily about the southern border, where we have not seen Kamala Harris rebound and regain on that issue in a way that would be substantive enough to say that it is a non-issue in Arizona. It absolutely is an issue, a very important one to many voters there as a border state. That makes a difference, and it shifts the state ultimately to Donald Trump. In the contrast, though, I think that Kamala Harris wins the state of Nevada by a tilt margin. I trust John Ralston. I also think, looking at some of the early voting numbers today, Democrats are doing really well in terms of that early voting number. Really, really well. And so if that holds, Democrats actually might win by more than a tilt margin. But as of right now, I could see that, putting Kamala Harris ahead by roughly half a point, as John Ralston suggests. So Kamala Harris, 247, Donald Trump, 230. Now it comes down to these four states on this eastern side of the United States: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Now, I think based on the 2020 election result and some of the data points we're seeing out of North Carolina, Donald Trump holds a very narrow advantage, but I could see Kamala Harris actually winning this state. It's going to be close. I think it's going to be closer than it was in 2020. I think Democrats have invested a lot more in the state than they did in 2020. Republicans have too, which shows signs that their internal numbers probably aren't as pretty as they seem externally. But North Carolina is still a Republican state, and I do think Donald Trump holds the narrow advantage at 246 electoral votes, with its 16 electoral votes in its column. But this is where things might get a bit more controversial. I think North Carolina will go red, but this is the big one. I think Georgia is going to go blue. And I know you might be shocked, and I could be very well wrong. That is the way these things are. All of these predictions are less than a point, meaning they're well within the margin of error. But I think Georgia today, I would call it blue very narrowly. These turnout numbers are looking very promising for Democrats. I do think we're at a point where Kamala Harris could narrowly get across the finish line, just like Biden did. Not in Arizona, but in Georgia right now. And it could be enough to give her the 16 electoral votes that are crucial in this battleground state. So, final two states. I love saying the word so, but I'll stop because you're probably getting annoyed. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Both of them, I think, will vote together with Michigan, but not share the same characterization in terms of margin, but will share the same victor. And that I do believe today, November 5th, 2024, in contrast with my prediction 2 weeks ago giving Donald Trump the victory, I think Kamala Harris wins the election. A combination of factors have led to states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan having increased enthusiasm on the Democratic side in this final week. Increased numbers on college campuses of people who are engaged and excited to turn out and vote. Higher return numbers from Democrats as we've gotten closer to the election, and more anticipation that Democrats will in fact be voting on Election Day in numbers that have not been seen before. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. All states I think Kamala Harris will win by less than a point. I would not be shocked if Donald Trump won. But I think, hold me to it today, Kamala Harris wins them. On the flip side, Donald Trump, I think, wins North Carolina and Arizona. Same story. Because they're less than a point, I feel confident enough to say that I think they could go to Kamala Harris too. But Donald Trump holds the narrow advantage. Final map here being 292 to 246 feels very weird and very reminiscent of the 2020 election. Maybe just goes to show not much has actually changed since the last cycle. Pennsylvania has gotten closer. North Carolina has gotten closer. Georgia has gotten better for Democrats. Iowa's gotten worse for Republicans. It's an interesting map here because the top line number is worse than Biden's victory in 2020, but in a way is arguably more impressive for Kamala Harris given the circumstances and the cards she was dealt. So the final map here, a flip in Arizona. Nothing else changes, shockingly or not shockingly. Donald Trump at 246, Kamala Harris at 292. The Senate map, Republicans at 52, Democrats at 48. And the governor map, Republicans at 8 and Democrats at 3. And so again, rounding out this video as I did in the beginning, make sure to check out ltelections.com. Check it out. It's ran by a phenomenal team. They do a great job. They have a great Discord server for you to join if you're interested. Discord.gg/LTE or discord.com/invite/LTE. And if you're checking out any type of election prediction website, yapms.com is the best way to go. They do great stuff with their election stuff. By the way, none of this is sponsored. If you were wondering too, I'm not getting paid to say any of this. They just do a great job. I've loved using their website for the past 2 weeks. 2.5 years. Do really, really good stuff. Or maybe if it's longer than that. My entire perception of time is getting so warped here. But now we're in the closeout. And so as we reflect on this final day of the election, I just want to thank you guys so much for joining me on this really long journey. It has been a great time covering this election. I've gotten to see so much happen, gotten to just hear and analyze and understand so much. I feel so fulfilled as to where we are with this election, as to what we have learned from it, what we have seen and heard from it, the new political standards that have been set from it. We are living a historical moment today. We have been living a historical election. Maybe that's why it's so exhausting. But it's a close race. Anybody can win, but Kamala Harris today, I think, has the upper hand. Republicans in the Senate, Republicans in the governorships, and in the House, I don't know. Don't have a prediction for you, and I apologize for that. I do think Democrats have the narrow upper hand, but I don't have a map district-by-district prediction. Overall, though, very close race. It's going to be a long evening, long week. We're not going to get Nevada for a while. We're not going to get a lot of states for a while. We might see some, really interesting results at 8 p.m. that might be completely contradicted at 10 p.m. I encourage you to watch with an open mind and an open browser to ltelections.com. I'll stop advertising it now. But overall, thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey. I hope you'll join me on the next one. I'm not going anywhere. We'll cover 26 and we'll cover 28 because in 2020, everyone said, where are you going to go? Is this going to be over? Are we going to end the YouTube channel? No. Elections always happen. Believe it or not, we move on. Believe it or not, things change and elections happen again. And it'll be another more important election or less important. I don't know. But it's going to be a really exciting time over the next, couple of hours, arguably the next 12 hours to see how the results pour in. Won't be doing a live stream. I apologize for that. But I'm really interested to see what the results are. And we'll be covering them tomorrow. We'll be making videos probably throughout the day. It's going to be a very long and grueling campaign end, probably very fitting to this campaign season. But again, thank you guys so much, so much for joining me on this journey. It has been such a fun time. And I can't wait to do it again in 4 years' time. So thank you guys so much for watching my video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, probably not 2024 election related. Make sure to comment down the suggestions anywhere you want. I'll probably read a lot of the comments because this is my final video for the 2024 cycle. I'm really excited to see what the results are, or not final video for the 2024 cycle, but you get what I mean. If you're interested and bored, if this is hours before the CNN coverage or MSNBC or Fox News, there's a video on your screen for you to watch and a playlist for my 2024 election predictions and videos where you can actually see my first ever video on the 2024 cycle was Mike Pence versus Kamala Harris. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Scroll to the very top. It might already be there. But all in all, again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you all tomorrow.